Have you ever wondered what might happen if someone mashed up The Princess Bride with Calvin and Hobbes? Wow! So have we. Doesn't everyone? Well, thankfully, comic artist Johnny Jimison has arrived to satisfy this very specific itch with his graphic novel series, The Dragonlord Saga. In vivid color and high adventure, you can join Martin, the stable boy, and Marco, his well-intentioned brother, as they embark on an epic story full of bandits and dragons, danger and humor, brotherhood and villainy, and just one, sarcastic talking horse. The third volume of this graphic novel saga, Dragons and Desperados, is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the Rabbit Room store or your favorite bookseller and discover the secrets of the Dragonlord today.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for. More insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets about what matters most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Geit, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
You know how conversation is. It's the most wonderful thing. It's unscripted, it's spontaneous, it's stream of consciousness. So I've spent a lot of my life in conversation just chasing rabbits down trails. And there's always laughter at some point. I mean, I won't say that's the purpose of a good conversation, but it sure is an ingredient of a good conversation, right?
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. This episode is brought to you by the Habit Writer Development Cohorts. I've taught a lot of writers over the last 3 decades, and here's a recurring theme. If you're a writer, it can be hard to believe that readers need what you can bring. But your voice, your point of view, your combination of interests and insights, well, those are exactly what the world needs from you. I put together the Habit Writer Development Cohorts, a 6-week writing intensive to help writers like you recover your voice, build sustainable habits, and produce work that sounds exactly like you. From May 19th through June 27th, you'll write alongside a small group of fellow writers with structure, coaching, and support every step of the way. Find out more and apply for a spot at thehabit.co/cohorts. Speaking of voice, my guest for this episode has one of the most distinctive voices of any writer I know. Alan Levi is a songwriter, a memoirist, a fiction writer, and whatever genre or medium he works in, he always sounds like the person you're about to hear in the following conversation. Alan Levi always sounds like Alan Levi. His most recent book, a novel called Theo of Golden, is enjoying tremendous success. Alan remains humble, but his friends are mighty proud of him. Alan Levi, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure for me. Good to see you again, Jonathan.
It's been so fun to see Theo of Golden taking off all over the place. I keep hearing from people from various walks of life mentioning it, not having any idea I know who you are or have any connection to you, and they just say, hey, you know about this book, Theo of Golden? And I said, I sure do, and it's really fun.
Well, I love that. Yeah. It's been a pleasant surprise. Shock might be a better word. As you and I discussed when the book first came out, it was just an experiment on my part initially to see if I could sit still long enough to write a long piece of fiction. And I'd had no intentions of publishing it. So the fact that it ever saw the light of day is something of a surprise, but the response has been extremely encouraging, gracious, shocking.
Yeah. Well, the reason I called you to ask to talk is, I mean, we can certainly talk about Theo of Gold. We've done that in another episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been thinking a lot about voice lately. You know, I'm about to start a new cohort for writers and helping writers see what their voice is, to trust their voice, to lean into it, to realize that learning to ventriloquize somebody else's voice is never going to get them where they need to be.
Right.
You come to mind when I think of somebody who has a distinct voice.
Mm-hmm.
Your nonfiction, your fiction, your music, your conversation, just as a person, it all sounds like the same person. And I wanted to hear if you had anything to say about that.
Well, thank you. I take that as a great compliment, because
I mean it as a compliment.
Well, I know you do. Thank you. And the reason that I say thank you is I know of my own tendency to want to be other people. As a musician, I struggled with that a lot. There were musicians, singer-songwriters who I really loved. I listened to the music a lot. It's interesting, over the 20 plus years that I did music full time, I got to the point that I rarely listened to any other music. I just, because the tendency, given my own broken places, was to think, okay, I need to be like David Wilcox.
Mm-hmm.
I like that tuning. I like the way he does this. And you can hear a lot of his influence in my music.
Sure.
I want to be Andrew Peterson. I want to be Bebo Norman. I want to be James Taylor, that kind of thing. And so the thought, your observation that I might have a voice that is distinctly my own tells me maybe I've made a little progress against that temptation. I read a lot, and I'm not a good reader. I don't remember much of what I read. I don't read analytically. I don't read so that I can quote passages from other people. I read books to be changed, and I feel like that happens even when I don't pick up much that I can share with other people. But Wendell Berry would be a good example of someone who I read and I think, gosh, I wish I could write like that. And his voice sounds a bit familiar to me.
Yeah.
He's a rural man.
Yeah.
He grew up, as he said, around good talkers. I have had that same good fortune.
Yeah.
And when I read him, I think, gosh, I'm going to try to imitate Mr. Wendell Berry. Well, that is a fool's errand. And I think in the course of just writing blogs over the years, writing songs, I just realized that the pretense, if nobody else notices it, is very obvious to me. I'm trying to be someone else. And as I've written really just 2 books at this point, a memoir called The Last Sweet Mile, about the last year that I lived with my brother before he passed away, and then Theo of Golden, I just realized it's too hard to try to imitate somebody, and it's too self-defeating. It's no fun. And so I don't know that I write in my own voice intentionally. It's just the only voice I've got.
Yeah.
And
well, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would just say, when you say it's the only voice you got, yes, I understand that. That's not, but the problem is, you've got to get to a point where you're willing to say that one voice I've got, that's what I have to give to the world.
Yeah.
And you don't have Wendell Berry to give to the world. Wendell Berry has what Wendell Berry can give, and you've got what you can give.
That's all.
And that's all the world needs from you, by the way, is what you can give.
Yeah.
And nobody's mad at you that you can't be, Lucy Shaw or Stephen King. They do what they do, and you do what you do.
Yeah, or Jonathan Rogers. I think I've had the what would I say? The ambiguous good fortune of having no one to work with me. There are lots and lots and lots of times, you and I've talked about this before, that I have wished that I could float something that I'm writing by someone who writes.
Yeah.
Up in Nashville, y'all are just swimming in a pool of talent. In Hamilton, Georgia, it's real hard to come by. There are talented people here, believe me. And those good talkers, have a talent of their own
Absolutely.
that is enviable. But I think the fact that I've had to work by myself has it may have shielded me from being too much influenced by outside voices.
Yeah.
Because believe me, if somebody were to read what I'm writing and say, you need to do ABC, I would probably say, okay, I don't, I'll do ABC.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that wouldn't corrupt the voice that I'm trying to write in, which is my own. There have been times when people have read things and they will, they will offer suggestion, and I realize that's probably correct.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the way I see that sentence, that thought, that phrase. I'll give you a real simple example. When I was writing The Last Sweet Mile about my brother, there was a section of the book about my brother's laughter. Mm-hmm. People ask me what I miss about him most of all. That's it. His humor, his laughter, the way that he could pull laughter out of me. But I was telling a story in it, and it was about snakes and how we love to talk about snakes down here. If you're ever in a meet and three down here, yeah, and the conversation starts to wither, all you have to do is mention a snake and it lights up real quick. Well, I was telling a story about a snake, and at some point in that, I was talking about how I work in the woods by myself, which I do very, very regularly. And especially in summertime, every stick looks like a snake. And so it's nerve-wracking to be in the woods by myself, knowing that these serpents are out there. And in the story, I made the statement that it's amazing how many days have been, I don't know how I said it, interrupted by a plain old piece of tree wood. Okay? You know that because you got country in you.
Yeah.
But someone read that and said, well, why do you say tree? Why do you say tree wood? Why don't you just say wood? I mean, if it's wood, it's from a tree. And I said, well, that's how we say it.
Yeah.
Tree wood is how we say it. And that's now, in a moment of weakness, I might have said, well, yeah, that's kind of stupid. It's redundant. Let me take that out.
Yeah. But
that's very authentic to this area. And that's very authentic to a lunch conversation that I would have with anybody down
mm-hmm.
here.
Yeah.
So maybe I've been blessed by living in a desert, where I don't have people who interrupt too much the flow of what I'm doing. Having said that, I need somebody like that. And I'm working on a book now, a sequel to Theo, and I've been talking with my niece, and I said, we have got to have somebody who really knows what they're doing look at this before I put it out, if I put it out at all. But I think up to this point, I have been well served by the fact that the only voice in my head when I'm writing is my voice.
Yeah.
And what I've seen.
Yeah. I tell you what, I grew up among good talkers too.
Sure.
And I went to Vanderbilt, got a PhD in British literature, and that was a good experience, and I learned a lot. But to become the writer I wanted to be, I had to unlearn a lot of that,
right,
and settle back in, and realize that I learned a lot of what I need to know to be a storyteller. Not at Vanderbilt, but at the table. With the people I had some raconteurs, in my world that really made it to lean into what I had grown up doing all the time.
Right.
Was really transformative for me. Tell me about your good talkers in your world.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, from the start. From the cradle. My dad is a forester.
Uh-huh.
And so he owned a couple of sawmills. He owned logging trucks and all of that sort of thing. So it was a very blue collar world, grease on the shirt, dirt under the fingernails kind of thing. I worked at his sawmill one summer. I worked with a pulp wooding crew one summer. I think he made me take those jobs so I would study hard when I went to school. And it worked pretty good. Yeah. But all during the day when you shut everything down to either sharpen the saws or have lunch or fix something that's broken, you just start talking. Mm-hmm. And it's country talk. The grammar's not right. Syntax is a word that would never cross the minds of most of the guys that I grew up with. And then my friends down in Columbus, Georgia, which is to me, a real city. Even they had enough country still in them because their dads had similar sorts of jobs a lot of time.
Yeah.
You know, you know how conversation is. It's the most wonderful thing. It's unscripted. It's spontaneous. It's stream of consciousness. So I've spent a lot of my life in conversation just chasing rabbits down trails. And there's always laughter at some point. I mean, I won't say that's the purpose of a good conversation, but it sure is an ingredient of a good conversation, right?
Is it possible that it's the purpose?
I think.
I mean, the one of the ways that you know that a thing is important is that it's not a means towards something else, right?
Yeah.
If it's an end in itself, like if you say laughter is the best medicine, you suddenly turned laughter into something less than what it really is.
Amen. Good
because
point.
because that's saying laughter, yet that it's a means toward good health or whatever.
Right.
I mean, it's an okay thing to say. It doesn't really hurt my feelings when people say laughter is the best medicine, but I think that joy. That's a clue. It's the beginnings of what we're made for in the first place and what we're headed toward.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great thought. Yeah. The idea that, you know, and I would say laughter almost in quotation marks, laughter as representative of a life of flourishing, of joy. I was reading this morning in Proverbs 8, kind of the Proverbs version of the creation story, where wisdom says, I was there from the very start. I was there before anything was made. But a little farther down in the passage, wisdom says, I rejoiced at everything I delighted in it. And to me, that includes laughter. I mean, I can almost see wisdom personified as this voice that laughs when God made the cockatoo or the fringe bird or the dogwood tree or anything like that. Yeah. And conversation, I think, is like that. C.S. Lewis writes, as you know, about happiness as an end. He says that if we aim for happiness, we probably won't get there. If we make that our goal, we just live our lives in such a way that happiness is the fruit of it. And I think that conversation maybe works that way, that we converse with people who we're comfortable with, who speak in their own voices, and invariably laughter in that broad sense is the result of it. It may be maybe not an out loud burst of laughter, but there's joy, there's delight, there's pleasure in it, and there's connection. I mean, you know, these people that I've worked with who are the good talkers over the years, you know, it creates a bond between people, that we can have a conversation, be honest, laugh at the same things, disagree about things. I had lunch yesterday with two good friends of mine. One is he's a justice with the Georgia Court of Appeals, and the other is a former law partner. And so they're pretty bright guys. But even there, we started lunch, and I hadn't seen these fellows in a while, and one of them started sharing a story. And about 5 minutes later, when he finished the story, I said, you know, this has brought to mind how much I miss lawyers, because they're such good storytellers. Yeah. And the ones that really do it well, I mean, they are the most wonderful conversationalists. And they're working with cases, human conflict, you know. But so good talkers, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're blue collar or that they're, you know, ordinary common folk. There's some very, very educated people who still got a lot of that in themselves. The good lawyers do. Yeah.
So, Alan, all this is making me think about a time I was in graduate school at Vanderbilt, and you know how graduate school goes, very theoretical. I came home to Warner Robins, Georgia for Easter, and was at a Easter egg hunt. And there were kids swirling around doing their Easter egg thing, and there was a knot of men standing around telling stories about dogs they had known and tractors and things like that. And I stood outside the group, and I had, you know, some thought like, well, this is how, you know, narrative is how people make meaning, you know, some sort of theoretical thought. And then I immediately thought, well, this is silly for me to stand outside the group and think I understand what these men are doing more than they understand themselves. What they're doing. And I think I mentioned this earlier. So much of my learning how to do the work of a writer has been avoiding the temptation to get critical distance and learning how to lean back in.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? That we can become so academic or so absorbed in methodology and things of that sort that we forget the spirit of the work that we're doing and maybe the conversation that we're invited to be a part of. You and I began this conversation without really defining what a writer's voice is.
Yeah.
And,
Kind of took it
I
for
think,
granted, didn't we?
yeah, and I'm not even sure, honestly, that I could attach a definition to it other than to liken it to the spoken voice. I mean, we all sound different.
Yeah.
But I do think that voice is more than just our manner of delivery, the way that we construct sentences, that sort of thing. I do think that there is a spirit with which we communicate that contributes or maybe largely defines what the speaker's voice is. I'll tell you a criticism that I've gotten over the years as a songwriter and now even as a novice writer of fiction. I will harken back to a conversation that I had years ago with a friend who was very knowledgeable about the music industry and whatnot. Was not a believer, and he was very clear about that. But he said, "Man, you've got a lot of talent as a songwriter, and you could probably really make something of yourself, but you're just so unrealistic in your songwriting." And what he was saying was, you have got too much hope in your songs. And so I kind of took the criticism as a positive, because I think that the spirit with which I hope I write, and I think that this might be true for all of us as followers of Christ, we are bound by some bookends, one being the great command that we love God and love our neighbors as ourselves, and the other that we are trying to declare something to the world. And for me, hope is a component of that. So one of our favorite writers, you and me both, Flannery O'Connor, observed one time that to make us aware, us being the reading public, aware of just how broken we are, she said, I have to write these drastic storylines with grotesque characters and these really atrocious narratives. I think that at the opposite end of the spectrum, sometimes we have to write almost drastically in a positive sense to affirm the potential that we're capable of. And so I've had, not many, but I've had a couple of folks who said your story about the old man from Portugal, Theo, is way too positive. It's not realistic. It could never happen in the world. And I would push back against that. I don't think that it's incredible. And I know people who are pretty much like the old man from Portugal. My brother, now deceased, being one of them. But I think that there is to be a spirit in the writer's voice if the writer is a follower of Christ that ought to be distinct. It should be honest. It can be severe. It can be critical. It can be everything that any other writer's voice has, but it has that plus what the gospel brings to us, which is hope and a belief that there is goodness in the world and there is a good story that we get to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. But when I said earlier that you're everything that I know of your work, whatever genre, still feels like Alan Levi, that's really what I'm talking about, even more than diction or sentence structure or whatever. It always sounds like you.
Thank you. I will take that as a compliment. I think the danger is that at some point, if the voice becomes entirely predictable or if it becomes too monochromatic or too narrow, I would hate to be a writer that is so intent on propping up the goodness of life that I'm dishonest about the broken parts. And I've been pleasantly surprised with the Theo book that one of the chapters, and it was added literally 2 or 3 days before I finished the last manuscript, is a short chapter about sadness. And a lot of people who have read the book have commented that I felt like I had permission after reading that chapter to be sad and to acknowledge that there is this part deep down inside me, as much as I want to be hopeful and positive about the world and life as we know it, that just feels like I can't go there. But this old man saying sadness is a part of life that we all have to wrestle to the mat. It opened the door for them. And so I would hope that, and I know you would feel the same way. Any good writer, I think, would. We want to be honest. We want to be credible if we're writing realistic fiction. And we want to say, yeah, the world is broken, but. Yeah. And then on the other side of the but, we try to put life as we know it in focus.
Well, I think I find it helpful to think in terms of there's things that are true about the world and there are things that are truer,
Yeah. Oh, well said.
you know? And so and I think maybe that's the difference. I hesitate to speak in too broad generalities, but you know, I I read writers from all sorts of,
Right.
faith positions,
Right.
and from all over the place, people
Yeah.
say things that are true about the world
Yeah. Right.
and helpful and useful. And I
Absolutely.
also think that many times when I read those, I think, yeah, but there's something truer than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a writer, I would like to live in the parts that I believe are truer,
Yeah.
but that doesn't discount. That's the nature of the gospel. Is there
Yeah.
are
Amen.
there's some news that's not so great
Yeah. That's right.
within the good news.
It's interesting when I had that conversation with a musician friend years and years ago. I don't remember if I actually told him this, but I sure thought it. Yes, maybe the perspective that I bring to the songwriting that I do is unrealistically positive, but I believe in the God of the prophets. And you would really not want me to write the truth and the strong language of the prophets. You would see how wide my perspective or a believer's perspective is of life. That we're in a real dilemma. And I've written some things that were darker, but I hope I will never fall into the temptation of writing something dark for the sake of being thought serious. I read this interesting book. I may have mentioned this to you before. It's by David Halberstam called The 50s.
Okay.
And it's about the decade of the 50s. And it's a fascinating read. And you kind of get the sense that everything that we're dealing with today in the culture at large had its roots back in the 50s after the Second World War. Just so much happened during that decade. But one of the things that was mentioned is that Elvis Presley was one of the signal characters of that decade. And just the way that music changed, race relations changed in some ways. But one of the things about Elvis Presley that he learned early on in his career was, if you want to be taken seriously, do not smile. And so, and really, I mean, he had kind of a snarky sort of smile, and every now and then he would let loose with it. But he realized, okay, James Dean, Marlon Brando, these tough guys, they're the ones that are getting the attention. And I think sometimes that maybe as creatives, whether we're writing or painting or whatever, we're tempted to create that persona about ourselves, whether it's true or not. And I hope I never fall into that myself, because it would be to abandon a hope about which I am hopelessly hopeful. I believe in it desperately, and I think the world wants to have hope, and write accordingly.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, real quickly, I don't usually ask about sort of publishing business things, but can you tell me, last time we talked about, it really probably less than a year ago, we had an episode about Theo of Golden, and it was just making its way into the world. And in the meantime, it is just, I hear about it all over the place.
Yeah.
People are reading this book and find this book, this self-published book.
Yeah. So how did that happen?
About what happened?
Yeah. It has been a very pleasant surprise, to put it mildly. So as you know, I finished the manuscript, had no intentions of publishing it. Some friends got their hands on it. I was glad to let them read it. They're people who I trust, and I knew they would give me an honest assessment of it. They said, "We want you to do something with this. We think you should." And so I said, "Okay, I'll give it a go." Nothing ventured, nothing gained. But I knew I did not, and never have, liked the marketing part of any of the creative work I've ever done. I was a dismal failure at that as a musician. But this time around, I happened to be talking with a niece of mine who I adore. She was out in the marketplace. She's married, has 3 little children. She wanted a job that would allow her to stay at home. She had internet skills. She understands social media. She believes in me a lot more than I believe in myself. And she believed in the book. And so we worked out an arrangement that she would work for me, and still we are the entire enterprise. But let me just, and I may have mentioned this already. Did I talk about my friend Cubby Culbertson, who suggested?
Not while we were recording.
Okay. So I hired Erin. She oversaw the graphic design. We just did a crowdsourcing, pitch, and we found, I think the artist is from Romania.
Really?
We had basically designed the cover and the layout ourselves. But anyway, Erin took care of all of that. We finally got the final product. And in the dedication to the book, reference is made to a friend of mine, Cubby Culbertson, who was this really wonderful entrepreneur up in Columbia, South Carolina. And it said something along the lines that I dedicate this book to Cubby out of respect for our long friendship. And just as a small reminder that you promised if I dedicated it to you, you would buy 100 copies. Okay. It was meant as a joke.
Yeah.
Well, Cubby said, hey, I'm all in. I do want to have 100 copies of the book, but I don't want the books myself. He said, Erin, my niece, I would like you to find 100 book clubs and send a copy to 100 book clubs and see if you could get them interested in reading the book. Well, Erin discovered there are lots of book clubs. It's hard to figure out who the leader of the pack is for most of them. But she sent these 100 books out, and book clubs started to take a shine to the book. And you know how that works. I mean, somebody in Birmingham, Alabama has a friend, in Austin, Texas has a friend, in San Francisco has a friend, in St. Paul has a friend, in Portland, kind of thing. And the book it started going to lots of places via book clubs. We also had a small database, hearkening back to my musician days. And those people have always been so gracious to the work that I've done. And it's a microscopic group of people, but they are so valiant for the work that I've been blessed to do. And so, that, and then just nothing but the goodness of God and providence. The book has kind of taken off. And Jonathan, it has been a shock to us. And I will say this, because I know that a lot of people who listen to this are probably aspiring writers or aspiring artists of one way or another. And we don't like to talk about the marketing or the business end of what we do. But rarely do I go to a conference where we talk about the esoterics of creativity or theology of creativity. And I know in that room there are a lot of people who are asking the question to themselves, yeah, I get all of this, but how do I make a living doing this? And so, yes, traditional publishers are still around. It's hard to get to them, especially if you don't have an agent. I've never had an agent. But Amazon, for all the ugly things that can be said about it, has somewhat democratized the marketplace. And so Erin and I said, okay, we will let Amazon basically handle the distribution of the book. And it's print on demand, which means we don't have to keep any inventory. We do keep a handful of books at my website and sell a few there. But Amazon, as you know, sells 85 to 90% of the books in America. And so that's the big store. And it has proven, really workable for myself. Now, tomorrow, the book, of course, could fall off the cliff and we will have had our glorious moment, but it has really been fun.
You'll be down there with the rest of us if it falls off.
There you go, with Amor Tolls and company. At some point we all take that dive off the cliff, but so far it's been really good. And one of the things that has really blessed and encouraged us is that people buy by the box. We get as many orders for boxes as we do for individual copies of the book.
Wow.
And then those people, these goodwill ambassadors, some of whom we know and most of whom we don't, they spread the book out, and it's just like a feather pillow that has been broken open. We don't know where the feathers are landing.
Yeah. Well, the people who I hear about the book from, the people. So I mentioned earlier before we started recording that I have people who don't have any idea that I know you.
Yeah.
Just mention, hey, there's this book we love, and it's every time it's book clubs.
Yeah, right.
My book club is doing this.
Yeah, I had no idea there were so many, and I've never belonged to one myself. And most of them tend to be female. Mm-hmm. I think I've done one guy's book club. I've done some mixed clubs. And what we really enjoy doing, not that I've done many of them just because I want to focus on writing, but rather than doing one book club, unless it's a Zoom event, if I go somewhere to speak, we try to get like 10 or 20 book clubs together. And then you've got a room full of people. And, it just, if I'm going to leave home, I want to have I want to make the best use of my time possible. But we're getting a lot of invitations. I wish I could do every one of them. If for no other reason, then I just love to thank people for the kindness that they've shown to us. And now that I'm in a little bit of a break from first or the most recent draft to where I'll pick up in probably a few weeks. But we're going to try to do some during this spell. And but if I do not happen to get to your book club, whoever you are out there, and you've read it, God bless you. And I cannot thank you enough for affirming the work that we've done, and keep up the good work.
Well, Alan, I hope you'll keep up the good work. Thanks so much for being here. I just love what you do. And I've been so thrilled to see this book taking off.
Thank you. Jonathan, I appreciate what you do. I know that you take the time to wrestle big ideas to the mat for the rest of us. I love your newsletter. I buy a lot of books on the strength of your recommendation. So there are authors who are indebted to you. You keep up the good work too. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.